Right, let's get started. How many of you know what this is? Anyone know? This graph, specifically this point on the graph, is when Facebook knows that you have started your next relationship. Whether or not you have specifically told Facebook that you've started your next relationship by setting your relationship status. So how do they know if you haven't told them? These little black dots. Those little black dots are the number of timeline posts between you and another Facebook user. And that period leading up to that start of your relationship is 100 days. So what really fascinates me about this is, when does Facebook know that you're about to start a new relationship within that 100 days? Is it possibly before you yourself know? And perhaps, more importantly, who owns this information? Because it's valuable information about you, insight about you. So Facebook released this as part of a blog post. And in the comments, Wendy Ranoy asked, is this anonymized data publicly available? And Facebook's response was, sorry, we don't even release anonymized data to the public. This is strictly for internal use. So who owns this information, this data? In this case, it's very clear. Facebook owns this information. Now, if you've been following Facebook, at the start of this year, they bought WhatsApp for a staggering $19 billion. Why did they pay $19 billion for a messaging application? Well, for one thing, they had around 450 million users back then. Now it's over 600 million. So they paid for all of those phone numbers, 450 million phone numbers. But more importantly, they paid $19 billion for the right to eavesdrop on all of their future conversations. So you might say, oh, well, so what? Maybe that's the case, but I'm sure Facebook is run by, upstanding individuals, and, they will protect us. So let's take a look at who runs Facebook. Let's take a look at Mark Zuckerberg. In 2010, in an interview for The New Yorker, Mark Zuckerberg admitted that while at Harvard, when Facebook was very young, he had an instant messenger, an IM conversation with his friend. He admitted to having this conversation. And the conversation went, Zuckerberg, yeah, so if you ever need any info about anyone at Harvard, just ask. I have over 4,000 emails, pictures, addresses, SMS. And his friend goes, what? How did you manage that one? And Mark says, people just submitted it. I don't know why. They trust me. And here's the best bit. Dumb fucks. Dumb fucks. That's a beautiful term, isn't it? Now, of course, this was when Zuck was young and Facebook was small. I'm sure that the intervening years of astronomic fame and fortune have only gone to make him more reflective and nuanced in his opinions of people. Or maybe not, because if you looked recently at the news, everyone was going crazy over the fact that Facebook published a study that they did on an emotional contagion. What's an emotional contagion? So the study they did was basically to take some people without their knowledge and to only show them positive posts on their timeline, and to take other people and only show negative posts. And they wanted to see how people reacted to this differently. Now, this is no small thing, because mood disorders are no small thing. About 60% of suicides are preceded by a mood disorder. So this is why people got angry. They said, wait a minute, Facebook shouldn't be experimenting on us without our permission. And Facebook said, oh, we're sorry. The author actually said, my co-authors and I are very sorry for the way the paper described the research and any anxiety it caused. Sheryl Sandberg went further, and she said, this was part of ongoing research companies do to test different products. In other words, we do this all the time. It's what we do. We just don't publish everything that we do. So Facebook experiments on you every day. That's part of their business model. They just don't publish scientific papers that get picked up by the press, right? That's just what they do. And that was what it was. In other words, we're going to keep doing it. It was poorly communicated, and for that communication, we apologize. And the best bit, she ends it with, we never meant to upset you. She could have finished off that sentence, dumb fucks. And I don't know, maybe we deserve it. If you look at some of the news coverage around it, some of the articles that were written, here's one, should Facebook manipulate users? Let me think about that for a moment. Maybe, I mean, that might be a good thing. I don't know. So you might say, Aral, so what? Okay, maybe that's the case, but Facebook is optional to my life. It's not essential. These services from Silicon Valley, they're just optional things. I can take it or leave it, right? I beg to differ. Our relationship to computers has altered fundamentally in the last 30 or 40 years. Computers used to be these external devices that you had to drive to use, right? They were impersonal. Today, we wear them on our persons. You don't get more personal than that. There was a time when computers were disconnected from the world and disconnected from each other. Today, they're always connected. They're always on, via a plethora of sensors. They're always hearing, they're always seeing. Today, it's not too much of a stretch to say that we are cyborgs. Not in that we inject ourselves with technology, but that we use technology to extend our biological capabilities. In short, we experience the world and we manipulate the world via technology. And when these tools work, they empower us. If they don't work well, they enfeeble us. So I disagree with the notion that they're optional. Increasingly, these services, these products are becoming essential to participating in modern life. So the question then becomes, who owns these essential tools? And the answer today is a handful of companies. Apple, Facebook, Twitter, Google. And they share a common characteristic. They're all closed. They're all proprietary. And a subset of them, Facebook, Twitter, Google, also share the same business model. The business model of free. So you might say, hey, so what, Aral? Free's great, I love free. What do you have against free stuff? Anyone love free stuff here? No? Nobody? You all hate free stuff? Like you wouldn't be here if it was free? No? You're just sniggers, like no one's gonna put their hand up. No, okay. So if you love free stuff, you're gonna love my new startup. That's right. I'm sorry, this is a sales pitch, but you're gonna love this. It's called Snail Mail. And with Snail Mail, we have solved a very, very important problem. That's right. We have solved the problem of real mail. With Snail Mail, you will get free, real mail forever. Send as many letters as you want, as many packages as you want, to as many people as you want, anywhere in the world, for free, forever. Who would use Snail Mail? You know it's a trap, but who would use it? Yeah? Well, there is a caveat. We do open your letters, and we do read them, but we only do this so we can get to know you better, so that we can give you helpful hints and suggestions based on what we've understood. It might be right, it might be wrong. We're just trying to help. And then, don't worry, we'll put all of this back into the envelope. You wouldn't even know that we were there. So, who used snail mail? There's always one. In this room, there are 3. It's free, I'll use it. The rest of you, how many of you use Gmail? How many of you in the room use Gmail, right? There might not be a person at Google who's reading through your emails, but there are computers, there are algorithms, and they're reading through your emails to get to know you better. So that's snail mail. It's at snailmail.com. Please tell your friends. I think it's going to be huge, and they're going to love it. So share it, please. So you might say, Aral, okay, so what? So you talked about Gmail. If I make the decision to use Gmail, I'm making a personal decision, and I know the trade-off. I know that I'm giving up some of my privacy, and in return for that, I am going to get a very valuable service. I get it. That's fine. I'm okay with that, right? Well, again, that's not really what's happening, though, is it? Because when you make a decision to use Gmail, you're not just saying it's okay for Google to read your emails. You're also saying it's okay for Google to read the emails that everybody else, all of your friends, all of your colleagues, anyone who emails you sends. So you've also made the decision for them. So in that sense, it's much more like smoking and secondhand smoke. It doesn't just affect you, it also impacts the people around you. And say, for example, you have a custom domain, they may not even know that Google is going to read their email. So why does Google do this? Are they a bunch of evil henchmen in a basement somewhere, standing around the table, going, maybe, I don't know. I don't think so, though. They do this simply because it's their business model. There's no conspiracy theory here. You don't need conspiracy theories when you have the simplicity of business models. It is their business model to make money from your data. That is it, right? Just like the mutant plant from outer space in the musical Little Shop of Horrors that starts off as a little sapling that needs drops of blood to grow, and then as it gets bigger ends up eating whole human beings. Google needs your data to grow. And how do they get it? Well, there are a number of ways. Services. Remember, Google started out as a sapling. It started out as a search engine. They weren't even tracking you when they began. They stumbled onto that business model. But today, they're a very different beast. Today, they offer a myriad of services. Do you want somewhere to put all of your photos? Great. Go put them on Picasa. Will Google be running facial recognition, etc., to understand who you are and who your friends are? Yes, of course. Do you want somewhere to put all your files? Put it into Google Drive. Will Google be looking through all of your files to get to know you better and to understand you better? Of course. That's their business model. That's how they make money. You want to talk to your friends? Use Google Hangouts. Will Google be listening? Of course they will be. That's just how they make money. And there are games. Who's used reCAPTCHA here in this room? You know what reCAPTCHA is, right? It's a CAPTCHA for forms. It helps protect forms. But it's also a game. So sometimes you see what is a street sign that Google has photographed with their Street Maps car, Street View car, sorry, and they can't read it. So they say, okay, help us to read this. It's a game, and then we'll give you a little something back. Oh, that's kind of cool. All right. And then there are actual games. Has anyone played Ingress in this room? Ingress, some people, okay. So Ingress is a game, for those of you that don't know, where you walk around town and you try to find landmarks and the best way to get from one landmark to another. What's really happening is there's an alien invasion and you're trying to hack into these landmarks, you know, which and actually thwart the invasion. But what's really happening is that you're providing Google with very hard to come by data on pedestrian walking patterns. That's hard data to come by. They don't have the resources to go through and find the best routes around town. So what do? They use you. They're like, go ahead, take the game, go run. Show us how to get there. So in this scenario, you are the lab rat. So you might say, okay, well, I'm not going to use their services. And Google's lost. They can't lose. So what do they do? Well, if you're Google, the next step is to provide devices. Devices like the beautiful, beautiful Nexus phone. Anyone use a Nexus phone? Gorgeous experience, right? Gorgeous experience. Google gets user experience now. They didn't used to. They do today, which makes them all the more dangerous. But what is this? With a device, what happens is they make the login, the sign-in to your device, your Google username and password. So it doesn't matter what service you use, they will still get some valuable data. And so even if you're using the services of other companies, they will still get valuable data. And the same is true for their tablets. And the same is true for the Chromebooks that they're pushing so hard right now into schools. And if that's not normalizing surveillance, I don't know what is. You know, they actually have to back away from that and say, okay, we're not going to, read the emails of the children that are using. Wow, and there's no uproar about that. So you might say, Aral, okay, you know what? You've scared me. I'm not going to use their services. I'm not going to use their devices. And they've lost. Google can't lose. What's the next step? The end game. If your business model is to monetize data, if you need data to grow, your end game is to provide connectivity. Because with services, I can stop using your service. You've lost. With devices, I can stop using your device. You've lost. What if I connect you to the internet? What if I make the username and password for the internet your Google username and password? Then it doesn't matter what device you use. You can use an iPhone. I'll still get some valuable information about you. So that's the end game, like Google Fiber. Sign in with your one Google account into what? Into the internet. But what about the next 5 billion? Has anyone heard this term, the next 5 billion? Yeah? It's usually people with very expensive suits who like to talk about it. So the next 5 billion are the next 5 billion people in parts of the world where, they're disenfranchised and these poor people can't get on the internet. And of course, there's no one there who can fix this problem. They can't fix this problem for themselves, of course. So what do we have to do? The white man has to bring the fire to them, right? The white man has to bring the internet to the next 5 billion. And how's the white man going to bring the internet to the next 5 billion? The white man's going to do it with balloons, right? With Google Loon, with actual balloons, or satellites, or drones. They're looking into all of those. Right? And if that's not a new form of colonialism, a digital colonialism, I don't know what is. Because believe me, there are people within those very communities who are already solving some of these problems, and maybe those are the people we should be supporting. So that's data about you. That's important. But there's more data in the world. There's data about the world, right? And Google needs that data as well. So what do they have? They have satellites, they get satellite views, they have mapping data that they buy from countries. Sometimes they sell it back to the people of that country afterwards. And they have Street View. Who's seen the Google Street View car driving by? Who's kind of done the photo bomb? Yeah. It's great, right? Google Street View car goes around, gets 3D information, but there's some places you can't go with a car, but you still need the data if you're Google, right? Which is why there's the Google Street View trike. But there's some places you can't go with the trike, but you need the data. So that's why you have the Google Street View snowmobile. But what about indoors? You can't go there with a snowmobile, right? That's why they have the Google Street View trolley. And if you can't get there with a trolley, don't worry, because there is the Google Street View backpack. But even with this backpack, or perhaps because they're wearing a backpack, there are a couple of places that you probably will not let Google go. One of those is your office, your workspace. The other is your home. Now, I say probably because I've seen a parody video shot online where people went posing as Google Street View to people's houses, and they said, hey, Google Street View, we'd just like to take a few photographs of your house, is that okay? Of the inside? And people were like, okay, come in. It's fine. So probably, but I'm thinking that no one in this room would let Google Street View with their backpacks into their home, right? To put it on Google Street View. Which is exactly why they need you. So, who's heard of Project Tango? Their new phone project. Project Tango is great. It's a new phone, and it has a depth sensing camera and motion trackers. And what it does is you buy this, right? You can't buy it yet, but you buy it and you go into your home, and you start walking around, and it starts mapping your home, the inside of your home, in 3 dimensions, and it starts recognizing the objects that you have inside of your home. And of course, sharing all of that data with Google, because you will not let them into your home. That's why they need you to do that for them, and you will pay for the privilege of doing that. Why? Because just like Audrey 2 from The Little Shop of Horrors needs blood to grow, free services like Google, Facebook, etc. need your data to grow. It is just their business model to make money from your data. So their business, essentially, is to spy on you. The business of free is the business of surveillance, of spying. And in the past, in the personal computing days, we had a name for this. Do you guys remember it? When you installed something on your computer thinking it would do one thing, but then it started like stealing your data and sending it. I believe we called it spyware. So why don't we start calling it that again? Now, spyware 2.0 is not about cloak and dagger. Spyware 2.0, what we're seeing today, is all cute doodles. It's all colors of the rainbow. Spyware 2.0 loves you like a kitten. That's why it's hard for us to recognize it as malware. But it is exactly what it is. Eric Schmidt, ex-CEO and current executive chairman of Google, said, "We know where you are, we know where you've been, we can more or less know what you're thinking." That was about 4 years ago, or as we call it in internet time, an eon. And what we've also done is we've redefined what private means. Private used to have a very definite meaning. So if you were meeting a friend and having a private conversation, you would be just the two of you, you would be talking to each other, no one else would be overhearing it, and you two would be the only people that participated in that relationship. So let's take a look at what private means, for example, on Facebook. Who's had a private conversation on Facebook here with someone else? Who's had a private conversation they wouldn't want to see on that screen right now? Some of you? Yeah, there's someone in the back just put their hand up for the second one. That's great. So you might think when you're having a private conversation on Facebook that it's the same thing, that you're together in a public place like a park and only the two of you can hear what you're saying. But that's not what's happening. Because for one thing, you're not in a public space. You're in Facebook's private space, in their home. And the other big thing to understand is you're not talking directly to each other. You have, in the middle, a creepy uncle. And here's how it works. You tell the creepy uncle what you want to tell to your friend. The creepy uncle makes a note of it and notes it down for later and keeps that. And then the creepy uncle tells your friend what you wanted to tell your friend, right? So when Facebook says something is private, what they really mean is that it is public. And George Orwell had a beautiful term for this. In order to understand what Facebook means when they say private, we have to engage in what Orwell called doublethink in 1984. We have to understand inherently that private means public. And in this model, who are we? Who are you? You are the quarry being mined. You are the livestock being farmed. And it's not just even your data. Your data are just the atoms. They're valuable, but just like we mine natural resources and then we combine them and we build value out of that, the combination of all of your various data, your profile, is much more valuable than just the individual pieces of data. Why? Think about it. I can't take you physically. I can't just grab you and take you and put you into my lab and study you, psychoanalyze you 24 hours a day, run tests on you to understand how you work, how you think. I can't do that because we have laws against that. There are laws that protect our corporeal selves. That would be called kidnapping. I can't do that. But what if I could build a profile of you? What if that profile was so high resolution that for all intents and purposes, it was a simulation of you? Everything about you, apart from your body. I'm not interested in your body. Everything else about you is what interests me. Well, then I can take that simulation, that profile of you, and I can put that in my lab. And I can do whatever I want to it 24 hours a day. Because that version of you, that digital self, that simulation, does not have any rights currently. And that's one of the things that we have to start changing. One of the things that we have to understand and start to understand is that when we talk about digital rights, what we're really talking about is human rights. So you might say, Aral, so what? At least they're not sharing it with the government, right? Well, we all know that after 9/11, that wasn't true, right? After 9/11 in the United States, they formed the Information Awareness Office with the stated aim of gaining total information awareness, awareness of about all the information in the world, everyone, everything. And that was their actual logo. I kid you not, right? Now let me tell you something. If you're going to create this sort of a government agency, don't make that your official logo. People get scared when they see an all-seeing eye on top of a pyramid shooting laser beams at the world. And people got scared, so they said, we're so sorry, we're just kidding, we'll shut it down. We're just playing with you, we'll shut it down. But, as the Snowden revelations last year showed us, the NSA really needs to hire a PowerPoint designer. But apart from that, they did not shut it down. They kept it open. It just changed. It became more codified. And all of these companies that you see here were sharing information with the government. Now there's one more thing about this slide that I think I need to point out to, a technically literate audience like this, because it doesn't happen often, and I think we need to celebrate it when it does happen. It's so infrequent. Microsoft was first at something. That just doesn't happen every day. Thank you. I think they deserve a round of applause for that. So what was cheap shot? I know. So what were they sharing? Everything. Everything that we thought was private. But of course, that's not what private means. Private should mean for you alone. We had already accepted that private were meant between us. That's not necessarily what it means. But why? Why was the government doing this? Well, mostly because it is so much cheaper and easier for the government to ask a corporation to whom you have already volunteered your data for that information, because it's not under the same protections under the law once you volunteer it to a third party. And think about it, it's all in one place. It's easy. It's like an all-you-can-eat buffet of everyone's data. They just have to show up at the door and go, hi, can I have some, please? It's cheap. And that's one of the problems. It's cheap. Too cheap to spy on everybody. Dragnet surveillance is too cheap today. It's pennies, cents on the person. If we could make that £1,000, €1,000 per person, $1,000 per person, they'd think twice. They wouldn't be able to afford spying on everyone. They'd have to pick their targets. And I think more people are more comfortable with that. As Bruce Schneier, the security expert, said, the NSA didn't wake up and say, let's just spy on everybody. They looked up and said, wow, corporations are spying on everybody. Let's get ourselves a copy of that. We're missing out, right? And if that's the case, I'm sure that the people who run these corporations take this very seriously, and it's a grave concern, right? So let's hear from Eric again. Eric says, there's been surveillance for years. I'm not going to pass judgment on that. It's the nature of our society. So, Eric, what should we do?
If you have something that you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. Or maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place.
If you have something you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. Why didn't we think of this? Problem solved, people. We can all go home. Well, I know Eric, and I know that Eric is a stand-up guy. He didn't just say this because it fits his agenda or anything. He said this because he really believes it, and he wanted to prove to the world that he believes it. So, he created a number of websites. And he put his own personal videos, his own personal photos up there just to make the point, right? Here's some of my favorite ones. There's ericstoiletantics.com. He gets up to some crazy antics in the toilet. It's not my thing, but there's Eric's favorite sexy times with videos and photos that he put up there. But my favorite is ericsmasturbationadventures.com. He gets up to some zany adventures. They're crazy. Now, of course, none of these websites exist. And I know there's some developers in the room, nor should they exist. Seriously. Because privacy is not about whether you have something to hide. It's not about whether you've done something wrong or not. It's about having control over what you keep to yourself and what you share with others. It's not a hard concept to understand, but it is one of primary importance. So important that we enshrined it in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Article 12, to be precise. So when you hear that companies like Google, Facebook, Microsoft are heading coalitions demanding privacy from the government, the same companies that spy on you, we have a word for that. It's a word that comes from magic. It's called misdirection. It's basically saying, look at the evil government. Look at how horrible they are spying on you. Forget about the fact that that's how we make our money, right? So free is a lie. But it's more than a lie. It's a lie because it's a concealed barter. What do I mean by that? You're exchanging something, but the value of what you're giving up, what you're exchanging, is not made clear to you, is not made apparent to you. So it's more than just a lie. It's really a con, a confidence trick, the textbook definition of a confidence trick. Michael Novak, a product manager at Facebook, said, now we're thinking about privacy as a set of experiences that help people feel comfortable. Comfortable with what, you might ask? Comfortable with the fact that they don't actually have privacy. In other words, a con. But it's worse than a con because this business model itself is a monopoly today on the internet. It's not just Google. Let's say I want to stop using Google. What can I use? I can use Yahoo. What's Yahoo's business model? The same. I want to use Snapchat. I want to use Whisper. Oh, because those are supposed to be private, right? They erase the Snapchat photos from your device, not from theirs. How else are they going to make money, right? And also, there are startups. Who loves startups? Startups are great, right? Startups are all over the place, right? Startups rock. Startups like Spritz. Who's heard of Spritz? This is actually very cool. It's really, really cool. It's a new way of reading, right? Watch the screen. You'll see how it works. In fact, it's probably the first new way of reading since reading. And so it's awesome. And I was at a conference called Thinking Digital, and their CEO was presenting this. And he was even also telling us that, you know, they don't have any scientific data to prove it, but they've seen that with people who have dyslexia, it helps them read better, but also for small screens, it's great for reading. But what's their business model? You guessed it. To read what you're reading. They have an SDK, a free SDK, software development kit, that they provide to people to make other applications, and everything that you use that kit for, they get to read. So he was saying at the conference, we really would love to see more email apps use this. I wonder why. And remember that point about how people with dyslexia apparently read better with this? What is the actual thing we're saying then to them? Look, we've created a revolutionary new way of reading. So here's your decision now. You can either use this and read better than you can otherwise, but be spied on by us, or you need to keep reading the old way, which is not as good. I don't know about you, but I think we deserve better. I think humanity deserves better than this myopic single business model that has come out of Silicon Valley. And what about the Internet of Things? You've heard of Nest, the thermometer, smart thermometer that knows when you're home, knows when you're not at home, right? At the start of this year, Nest was bought by, surprise, surprise, Google for $3.2 billion. That was in January. And then they said, hey, Nest customer data, that data about your home, all that data about your home, we won't share that with Google. Don't worry about it, guys. They paid us $3.2 billion because they really love our logo. We won't share the data. It's fine. And then in June, they bought, and by they, I mean Google Nest bought, stay with me, it's a bit complicated, right? Dropcam, right? And they said in the introductory post, they said, don't worry, like Nest customer data, Nest Dropcam customer data will not be shared with Google. Okay, perfect. And that was on June 20th of this year. On June 24th, Nest to share user information with Google for the first time. And what were we doing, all of us? We were going, oh, the water's really getting nice and warm in here, isn't it? It's really comfortable. I'm really enjoying it. It's really awesome. So, the Internet of Things, if you as an individual do not have ownership and control, is the Internet of Things that spy on you. Wearables, you've heard of wearables. You've heard of the quantified self, right? The quantified self, if you don't have, as an individual, ownership and control, is the surveilled self. There are alternatives. We have the option of doing this differently. But the Internet of Things is not about things, it's about data. And where that data goes is what it's all about. Does it go to a place that you own and control, or does it go to a place that a corporation, a transnational, publicly traded corporation, owns and controls? And we might say, okay, well, these companies know what they're doing. What about companies who are trying to do the right thing? You might have heard of LO recently. I've been talking with them since May. They asked me for some advice, etc. They started off wanting to be an ad-free, private network. But they were centralized, and they weren't open. So those were problems from the beginning. But I was thinking, okay, well, they got their hearts in the right place, right? Talking to them. They got their hearts in the right place. They're trying. It might be a stopgap. Until I found out just recently that they took about $500,000 of venture capital. And let me tell you something. When you take venture capital, you stop being able to provide on those sort of promises because you lose control. How do you take venture capital? If you're an investor and I want to get your investment, I have to present you with an exit plan, an exit strategy from day one. I haven't even built my business yet. I have to tell you how we're going to exit that business, either through an IPO or either through selling to someone else. Regardless, what I have to do from day zero is to sell my users. So I can come up to you and I say, in 2 years, I'm going to have 100 million users. How much will you give me for 100 million users? Come on, how much will you give me? £1 million? $1 million? €1 million? Great. Why do you give me that? Not because you love me, because you want 4 times, 5 times, 6 times that back in 2 years' time when we sell those 100 million people, right? But we've sold them from day one. Then what do we have to do? We need to con them into using our platform and make them not see that they've already been sold from day zero. That's venture capital. Venture capital is the problem. The Silicon Valley model that we seem to be in love with here, that Google just invested $100 million, I believe, in the UK to push, is the problem. Startups are the problem. A startup is not just a new company. That's not what it means. A startup is a very specific type of new company. A new company that takes venture capital, that gets into that game and gets tied into that game, that sells its users from day zero, that's a startup. We can do far better than startups. We can create sustainable, long-term businesses. So what is the alternative? Because if we leave it here, I'm going to have a room full of very depressed people, probably at this point. Great, Aral, we're screwed. Thank you. No, we have an alternative, and we know what that alternative is. The alternative is free. And you might be thinking, wait a minute, free was bad. Free was wrong. What's going on? English is the worst language for this. Because we have one word overloaded with two very opposing, very different meanings. Free as in cost, zero money, right? And free as in liberty. Free as in freedom. And freedom is hard. I mean it, literally. It's hard to use. It's usually very, very hard to use. Free and open source stuff is usually very hard to use. This is a Firefox OS phone. It's one of 3 that I have now that I've lived with for 1-week intervals. The first one I got, this was its hello to me. It said, can you help me set the date? It said, yeah, seriously, that was hello. It was like, what's the date? I mean, seriously, unless you're some sort of like, a muscle-bound German actor who's a robot that's come back from the future to destroy humanity, what's the date shouldn't be your hello. And the other thing is, nobody bought this phone in 1980. No one. Why are you making me go through 30 years just to set the date? Why are you even asking me for the date? This was the Maps application, the opening screen. If you can't read what it says, that's okay. Neither could I. This is the Map app itself. Now there's a button right here at the very bottom of the application that I have never been able to hit. It became a casual game. Whenever I was bored, I would take out the Maps app and I would try to hit this button. It was like my own personal Flappy Bird. It was a game I'm unfortunately going to have to tell you that I was never able to complete properly. This was me sending a direct message to my girlfriend on Twitter. Now, if you can't see what I'm typing, that's okay. The keyboard is covering it. Yes. But perhaps the worst experience I had during that week was this. This is the Train Times website, the Train Times app on the phone, not working properly. So if you've ever had to take a train in the United Kingdom, I do apologize. I have to do it almost every day. It builds character. But on this day, because the app wasn't working, I did not know that every train to London Bridge Station had been cancelled that day. Don't ask me how that happens. But it did mean that it took me 2 hours longer than it should have to get home to my girlfriend, to my dog. That meant that I lost 2 hours of my life that I could have spent with the people that I love. You're all makers in this room. If this doesn't tell you how important what we do is, I don't know what will. We have a finite set of experiences in our lives, and then we die. That's it. As people who make things that people have experiences with, that they use that finite set of experiences, that finite set of time with, we have a fundamental responsibility to take those experiences with respect, to respect those experiences. So it didn't do that for me, right? We have to understand that features alone are not going to win this battle, and that we're losing it in the free and open source world because of this. One of the companies that makes one of these remotes understands how this works, and you can see it because the way it looks is a symptom of that organizational understanding of user experience. And also, let's just think about the Firefox OS phone for a moment. It's an open source phone built with web technologies that runs web apps. Who's got the best web apps in the world? Whose apps are you going to run on this phone? Does Google make good web apps? I don't know. Does anyone know in this room? Do they make good web apps? Really usable ones? Then let's ask another question. Where does Mozilla get over 90% of its money, of its revenue? Any guesses? Someone's got their hand up. Google. So this isn't old school corruption. It's not like someone from Google going over to someone from Mozilla going, hey man, all right, here's some money, put it under the table, and then you do what we tell you. That's not it. This is institutional corruption, as Lawrence Lessig talks about it. It is an influence in an economy of influence. Let me put it simply. If I paid 90% of your salary, what would you think of me? Would you hate me? Would you like me just a little? This is institutional corruption. But there is hope. And there is always hope. Which is why we created a social enterprise called INDIE, the Independent Technology Movement. And we have a manifesto in which we set out the roadmap for how we can create true alternatives. Alternatives that are independent organizations. We can't fix this problem with the existing organizations. Either they're sponsored by spyware, or they are spyware for the most part, or they cannot compete on user experience. We need to create new organizations that are independent. What do I mean by independent? Independent of venture capital, independent of those vested interests. These businesses have to be sustainable, long-term thinking, not thinking in terms of VC and exits and that myopic cycle, but thinking long-term, but not forgetting in terms of design, the short term. They have to be diverse. One of the biggest problems we have in our field is diversity. And here's why it's a problem. Forget everything else. Practically, here's why it's a problem. If I'm a great designer and I'm a white man, I can design really well for myself. I can probably design best for my own needs. I'm both a great designer, I understand design, and I understand my own needs really well. I can design great experiences for myself, right? What about if I try to design experiences for a different demographic? I have to study them, right? I have to try and learn what they're like, what they want. And if there's someone in that demographic who's a great designer, what if I'm competing with them, designing for themselves? I'll never be able to compete with that. So I can't make myself more diverse. But what I can do is make my organization diverse so that we can design for a diverse mainstream audience. And they have to be design-led. We have to let go in the free and open source world of our arrogance for designing for enthusiasts designing for enthusiasts, and saying to regular people, you're too dumb. We have to let go of that. They're not too dumb. We're dumb. We're dumb because we can't make things simple enough. We can't make things easy enough to use. And we do this. We build these sort of organizations, then we can build products that are beautiful. Beautiful not just in aesthetics. That's not what design is about. Beautiful in terms of function, in how they work, how they empower people. They have to be free as in freedom, and protect the freedoms of the tools that we build so they can't be closed off later on. They have to be accessible so that we can reach not just a privileged society, a portion of society, but all of society. And they need to be distributed in their topology so that we don't have centers that can become monopolies. That's the problem with the web. What we see today with the monopolies of Google, Facebook, etc., is not a bug of the web. It is a feature of the web. The web was always decentralized. Decentralized does not mean without any centers. Decentralized means with several centers. Because of economies of scale, those centers coalesce, they grow, they come together, until we're left with the sort of monopoly that we have today. What we need to do to build alternatives is to build a system with no centers, a distributed system, an evenly weighted topology. And if we can do this, then we stand the chance of giving people their own homes, starting them out in a safe place, not in the home of a person with known vested interests against them, not in an unsafe place and then say to them, protect yourself. No, we can start them off in their own home, where it's safe, where it's private by default, where their digital selves, their profiles, their simulations have the same rights as their corporeal selves. And if we can do this, then we can start to build a world where, through our technology, we have a future with human rights, with fundamental freedoms, and with democracy. Thank you. Thank you. You're very kind. Thank you very much.
What can I do? Can I educate others? How? And what else can I do? Do you have an answer for that?
There are so many things that can be done. It's not just even technology. You don't even have to be technically adept, really. There's a huge educational aspect to what we're doing. I mentioned that Google and Facebook are pushing, well, Facebook's also pushing Facebook into schools. Google's spending a lot of money to push Chromebooks into schools. We can help by pushing independent alternatives instead, by trying to show people that, having Google in your school, teaching computing, teaching surveillance as a norm, is like having McDonald's, teaching using McDonald's in a lesson about healthy eating. There's a lot to be done in terms of the education side of it. There's a lot you can do as a developer as well. You can take part in certain things. We are the indie tech, the independent technology movement. There's also the indie web movement, where it's much more about developers trying to build tools for themselves initially and exploring this area. Their scope, in a way, is more limited. We are about changing society. They don't necessarily see Facebook and Google as evil. They don't necessarily want to change the system completely, but they want to make it better from the inside. They want to work with them to see if they can change it, which is perfectly fine. We need different people working towards this in different ways. It's also something that I try to support. But you can take part in that. We are, as Indie, going to be releasing the core, really, of our platform in hopefully weeks, not months, as software that you'll be able to start using. So once that's happened, of course, all free and open, with an eye towards the phone. This is probably the first time I'm really talking publicly about it. But the phone is something is on a path that we're going to reach in 2 years' time. There are iterations on that path. Initially, we're going to start by releasing some of the core of our platform, this distributed, beautiful platform, which you'll be able to start using immediately to share things with your friends, or just among yourselves, like among your own devices, or in groups where private will mean private. So once that happens, take a look, see if you can help. Help us get the word out. Help us to spread the word about this. There's so much you can do on the whole spectrum. There's so much to be done. If you're into politics, go start lobbying. If you're into policy making, go start taking part in the EU and in those processes. I was just at the Internet Governance Forum in Istanbul a few weeks ago, where we held a session on privacy as innovation. Because what Google and Facebook say is, if you're against us, you're against innovation, you're against job creation, you're against all of these great things. When no, we're just against this one single myopic business model. Privacy itself is part of design. It gives you an advantage in design. Because when you're private by default, if you're not trying to sell your users, you're only designing for one audience, not two. Google designs for two audiences with orthogonal needs, with conflicting needs. Their users, their product, the people that they sell, you, in other words, and their actual customers, the people who buy you, the advertisers, etc. So if you don't have that, you're designing for one audience. That's a competitive advantage. That is going to lead to great amounts of innovation, and already is leading to actual innovation. So there's so much you can do. This is not just about building technical solutions. It's not just about building toys. We need to be active on all aspects. It's a wide spectrum.
Thank you. And one last question. It seems we have like an insider in the room because could be a personal question.
That's
more or
okay.
less. The question
Pink is my favorite color, if you're wondering.
Your toothbrush also colored pink?
It can be.
Multicolored toothbrush. So no, the question is, what moment led you to fight for indie web and indie tech and even sell your house on it?
Right. It wasn't a moment. So it was a gradual sort of awakening. As all things in my life have been in retrospect. I mean, of course, it doesn't seem like it back then, but I started out with technology when I was 7 years old. And my dad brought home an IBM XT computer with a basic manual and laid it in front of me and said, here, use it, you can't break it. And I proved him wrong a few years later. But it was the best thing anyone's ever said to me. It just opened up this universe where I could create things. I could create a star field. I could fly through the star field. It was just dots on the screen. It was like screen 13 in BASIC, you know? But I could do that. And when you're 7 and you can create a universe, that's magical. So that's what got me started into it. And it's been a slow and gradual progression from understanding that maybe it's not just about the tech. Maybe it's about what influence the technology has on people's lives. That's what brought me into understanding that what I do is design. Design and development are not separate things. They're one and the same. They're facets. And then slowly realizing, as I was working on the iOS platform, and seeing what was happening in terms of the Snowden revelations, which were the last step, but also in terms of the freedoms we were losing to these platforms, I didn't want to just create superficial experiences anymore. Because an experience can empower you in the here and now, but then enfeeble you long-term in terms of your freedoms and your human rights. I didn't want to just build superficial experiences. I didn't want to benefit these platforms, and I couldn't find a platform where you could design for the whole term, not just the short term. It's important. We can't be arrogant and say your experience today doesn't matter. We need to create great short-term experiences, but we also have to design for the long term so that we're protecting human rights and freedoms. So that's what I call whole-term design, and I couldn't find a platform where I could do that. And I don't want to stop working with technology. Maybe that's a very, selfish thing. It's something I've done all my life. It's not a job for me. It's just what I do and love. So I decided if it doesn't exist, I have to create it. And that's what led me to it.
Thank you for answering the questions. We had quite a couple more, but...
Well, I'm going to be hanging around, so just come and catch me. And I might be slightly tipsier if I've had a drink, but I'll try my best.
So again, thank you very much for
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me.